Okay, well, let's get started. I'm working on McCalls 8245. I'm making these for Christmas. This is my Christmas in July, getting started. I'm going to try and finish as much as I can, but after Ankara week, I don't know. Anyway, so I'm going to do view C, which is the robe, and I'm also going to do the long romper, what the model is wearing. Okay, so I have cut out my pieces. This robe, I am cutting it out in extra large, which is 20 to 22, because that suits all three young ladies that I'm making these outfits for. They are all varying heights, varying dimensions, but this extra large size lines up for all of them. It's so interesting, right? So I am going to make, I have 60-inch wide material. I've already cut out 3 of the 4 robes that I need to make. I had cut one out essentially for me, but the material I got from my daughter, I did not buy sufficient, so I had to send off to Fabric Mart to get 2 more yards. So we might be a little delayed on that, but I might be have enough to cut out the robe. So then it would be 4, so I'm just gonna set up a factory here. Okay, so you need, for the robe and sash, 3.5 yards. 60 inches is the only choice you have for this, because I could understand when I cut out the width of the bottom of the dressing gown, of the robe is so wide, you can't accommodate it on 45 unless you splice something. And the long jumpsuit B takes 3 5/8. So I really needed to have about 6 yards of every material. So I was able to get the other, the marigold color stretch velour and the wine colored stretch velour. I was able to maneuver it around and everything and get it to work. The white, I had enough material, essentially, and as you know, the one for my daughter with the silver stars on it, I did not have enough. So first things first, I cut out the pieces. Now, the pieces were not complicated. There was only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces, very large pieces. All right, so I cut mine out using a series of weights, and because I was doing multiples, I super pinned my tissue pattern to the first fabric, so then I could just lay it on the next and use my rotary cutter to cut out. Because remember, I'm doing 4 of them. Okay, so this is kind of a different kind of make. But don't fret, this is a very simple pattern, and I'm hoping that you'll see the rewards are great, especially with these luxurious fabrics. All right, one note for my sewers who are new or just thinking about sewing. This is the interfacing that they asked you to cut out for around the neckband and behind the neckband. There's only 2 things to interface on this pattern. All right, now this is a woven pillow made for knit, because it has stretch in it, okay? It's worth it. I mean, wait for it to go on sale. And I bought a whole bolt when I was in America. I don't work for Pellon, but everybody cover your ears. This is the company that I buy my knit from, Knit Pillin and everything. So when I come to America, little things like interfacing, I load up on because there's one type at Ping's. Oh no, sorry, there's two, but it's not knit. Alrighty, so just a note, you're going to need interfacing, and it would behoove you to get the stretch. Now here are all my pieces for the robe. There's the sleeve, the front, the front facing and back facings, tie, robe tie, and back piece. It's not too bad of a cutout at all. It's only 6 pieces, but some of them are quite large pieces. I like to use my rotary cutter. I can tell by when I cut and I have a few strings that my wheel is getting dull when I start getting little spots. I do have like a little gap in my cutting table here. My cutting table is just a regular banquet table. I get the thickest I can find. I have never been able to roller my way through it. I don't use this table for anything else other than my cutting, and most banquet tables, if you're using them for a picnic, you're going to put a tablecloth over them, right? And also they're you can fold them up, slide them behind a sofa, bed, chest of drawers, whatever, and it's a 8-foot length of cutting area, and I just cut right on it. I do have a self-healing cutting mat that I use for different things, but when I'm doing large items or in a hurry, in a pinch, I use my banquet table. It has scratches on it. I'll show you that. It has scratches on it, but I have never been able to cut through it, at least not with this. And for about $35, it's a really great cutting table. I don't know if anybody ever says that, but I love my banquet table. It's been rocking for about at least maybe 7 or 8 years now, and I haven't cut through. Now, because I underestimated, I didn't buy enough fabric to make the jumper and the robe for my youngest set. Like I said, I sent off for another 2 yards to do the jumper. She's only 5 feet tall, so I think I'll be safe with that. I've been left with this 1 yard, let's see, a yard and a little over a yard piece, but this could be a hacking shirt because that's how I have all those hacking shirts. I was wrong. I found the hacking shirt on eBay. I don't know if I was putting in the wrong number all this time, but they have several of them, and I will include the number again, and I will show a picture of it over here to let you remember what I'm talking about with my hacking shirts. I have never bought a piece of material to make a hacking shirt. It's always been the leftovers from some other project, and I love them. They're like my t-shirts. Now, another thing, my sewing weights. I do have lovely official sewing weights. I do, but in Jamaica, they don't use a lot of their penny coins, and they were starting to pile up in the containers that we hold them in. This is my, I buy these glasses all the time, and they always send these cases for them. So I fill them up with coins and packing tape them, and they are a really nice shape to use as fabric weights. And I find I'm using these more than my set of these, which is kind of unusual. Just another tip. All right, so that took about like 20 to 30 minutes to do that. And that's all the time I have this morning. I have some things to do out. I have to go shopping and get a few things for the house. But this is just another stopping point to show you that it doesn't have to all happen at one time. You can come in if you have some place to set your machine up. You can come in 10-15 minutes, and trust me, you keep putting things in the chute, I call it, and every once in a while, after about a month, things start popping out every day. It doesn't matter what the project is. If you just consistently 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, if you get like a chance to watch a movie and do some handwork, or you get a chance to watch a movie and sew, if it's a type of movie that you've watched over and over again and you don't have to pay attention to every single minute, like I call them basement movies, like for me, Practical Mad, any Sandra Bullock movie, any musical, I can put them on and sing along, and it's like you have company. Okie doke. I'm back for running errands. I did go to the fabric store, y'all. Anyway, I'm going to start by filling some bobbins. My two pieces, the white with the tie-dye and the stars, and the white with a little bit of a shimmer in it, are the only two things I can sew at the same time. The other ones have very distinct colors. One is a marigold and one is cranberry. So I'm going to fill some bobbins. I think I want to do the marigold first. So I'm going to get started on that next. Now, all of the fabrics that I am sewing with today have a stretch to them. This is a velour. So I adjusted my stitch to a tiny zigzag. So I ended up making the stitch length 1.5, and I made the stitch length 4.5 and the zigzag width 1.5. So that resulted in a zigzag, like a nice stitch, but it has some give to it. Because if I don't put that give in it, you sit down in it, you stretch or something, you'll hear those little tiny little pops that will eventually, tiny little holes, and eventually be too embarrassing. So it's best to just give it a little give right now. So the next thing I did is I ironed on my fusible stretch knit interfacing onto my facing pieces. There was the neck facing pieces and the two front facing pieces. So I ironed all of those. All right, so after ironing all the front facing pieces, I'm going to sew the neck back facing pieces to the two front facing pieces. Now, the curve on these pieces are very subtle, so hopefully you snipped your notches that were on the pattern pieces to let you know where things line up, and also look for this little bump out, which would be about right here. Okay, just a little trick of the trade. Now I have stitched my back neck edge to my two front facings, and then of course you have another copy that's going to be the inside of the lapel. And I stitched the uninterfaced back neck facing to the two front facings. All right. Now I think I'm going to have to attach the front row pieces to the back row piece at the shoulders. I'm going to use a French seam. You can use a serge seam. You could use a double stitch seam. I just love a French seam. And then we're going to see about putting on the neck, attaching the neck edge. Now to do a French seam, I'm going to attach the front of the robe to the back of the robe at the sleeves. And I'm going to have them face the right sides out. Now usually in sewing, you would stitch the right sides facing each other inside the garment, but we are going to encase our seam allowance inside the seam. So I'm going to start by pinning them to keep them in place. Let me do this sleeve just in case. If you already know how to do a French seam, you guys can go ahead and fast forward through this part, but I'm going to attach the front to the back at the sleeve, and I'm going to use just the distance between my presser foot, the edge of my presser foot, and the needle to be my first seam, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now, someone did question me about the fact that I sew over my needles. It is not a good practice. I just have really know my machine. I rarely lose a pin, and I tend to slow my machine down. I put it on a medium speed, not a fast speed, but it is good practice to take your needle, your pins out as you sew. Now that I have stitched them both wrong sides together and I have this seam, I would turn it inside out and press along this seam. But something I have to be aware of is that I am working with a plush fabric, so I have to be very careful how I iron in case I crush some of these plush fibers that are sticking up to give this velvet feel to it. And also, so I have to make sure I don't get any shiny spots with the material gets pressed down. I do have a needle board, and I will show you what that looks like. This is my needle board. As you can see, it's had lots of use. Let me see if you can see it from this side. All those little needles, they're filled with fluff. They're kind of hard to get out. I've been trying to clean them for some time. But what it's great for is when you have to iron velvets and things that have a pile. You can lay your silk velvets or your velvets plush side down and iron on the back, and these needles will keep those threads from crushing and giving you a shiny spot on your fabric. And so it's good with velour, it's good with velvet, it's good with anything that the plush is not too deep. And I've had mine for quite a few years. As you can see, I've gotten a lot of use out of it, but I also kind of hard to clean. All right, now that I pressed my seam, I used a pressing cloth because, you know, these materials can melt. I'm going to stitch it again, just a little bit wider than my presser foot to encase the inside seam, which I have trimmed a bit. Now, if I was going to complete the French seam, I would stitch this seam allowance to the front of the shoulder seam along there, a very thin top stitching, but this is a softer kind of pattern. This is not really a shirt, so it's not going to have that top stitching. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave it encased like that. Now it's time to attach the back facing and the front facing to the front and the back of the robe garment. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pin it in place and then stitch it. Whew. I'm trying to think of cool thoughts. It is very warm here in Jamaica. I can't imagine what it is like for you all in the States. But I have now pinned my facing to my front and my back. Now, it's a lot of pins, but I have found that this material really likes to shift. Now, if I was making this in, well, I don't think you're supposed to make it in a cotton, but if there was like if it was a thinner finish, I would have weft. If it was a thinner, I wouldn't, but it has shifted on me. So now this is what I normally do. I do not start at one end and sew all the way around. Sometimes I find that it, even though I have a differential kind of feed thing going on my machine, that means there's something in my presser feet keeping both fabrics in line. Even then, sometimes it doesn't work out. So I usually start in the middle of the collar and sew down one side, and then I'm going to sew down the other side. And usually everything works out well that way. Okay, let's get to sewing. Okay, so I have stitched the front facing together, and now I'm on the trim. So, you know, trim and talk, trim and talk. What are we going to talk about? Well, recently I had a revelation. I have been enjoying this time of sewing to my own tune, like having the time to, no kids, well, dinner, but no homework, no soccer practices, no lesson plans, no all of those other things that I used to have to, it was a love of my life to do. And then I would stuff my sewing around the edges. So now I can sew at will, and I can sew what I want as long as I can afford the fabric. And I noticed that I must be maturing because I want to protect how much I love doing this. And I realized that if I had to do this for a living, or if I had to do this on demand, I would not enjoy it as much as I do. And I kind of was getting to understand that, like, if I make it out of my creativity and love for a person, then that's fine. But if I need to do it on demand, I don't have that same feeling, and it takes away something really beautiful in my life. So the other day, my cousin, who I love dearly, and sees my makes all the time, and wanted me to make some clothes for her. And let me tell you, I love my cousin, and I was grown up enough to say, no, I can't sew for you in that way. I can make something that delights me, that I want to have for you, and tickles my imagination and does something for me, I guess. But I cannot sew on demand, not anymore. I have in the past, but I can't anymore. I love this craft so much, and I love what it does for me, and what it, the meditation and what it does in my life, but I don't want to do it on demand. And I found that when I do it on demand, all of a sudden I get all kinds of weird stuff like fitting issues, making mistakes. So I always wonder if my brain is trying to sabotage me sewing me sewing on demand. My brain is like, we don't really want to do this, so I'm going to make sure that this doesn't fit, when I never had any problems before. So let me tell me how you feel. I mean, how do you feel about sewing when it's not your idea, or someone's paying you, or I don't know, maybe you don't like alterations. Maybe there's things you like to sew. Maybe you just like to quilt. Maybe you don't like making clothes. So go ahead and put in the comments what you like to do and what you don't like to do. All right, I still have more to trim. It's a long robe. So let me see, what can we talk about again? Well, I'm just coming off of Ankara week, which I absolutely loved. It was so wonderful to haul out all my Ankara, and y'all, I have another bucket. I have an entire 66 quart bucket filled with Ankara fabric that I haven't even touched yet. I do have trepidation about that orange, beautiful Ankara suit that I made. It was the one thing that I did not wash before I sewed. And so I think I'm not going to be able to wash it, because some Ankara you will find when you wash it, it is not as thick as you think it is. Some are wonderfully thick, 100% cotton, and some are light. So like, I think I'll put up here that purple dress I made. When I bought that fabric, it felt just like that orange fabric. But when I washed it, it became soft and fluttery, like what you're seeing in this video. And I am hoping that the orange is not that light, but I have a sneaky suspicion that it is that light, which will be fine for here because it's so warm in Jamaica. It will make it a really soft dress suit combination, and I think it'll be okay. I'm gonna pay attention. I don't want to cut a hole in this. So that's the only thing, but I did love it. And I had a lot of people love the crinoline. Y'all, I know that crinoline was extra. It was extra, I know it was extra. But I loved working with it. It is my 4th crinoline. I've made 4. This is the first time I made detachable crinoline skirts. And I really like it. I really like it. I think it's a wonderful kind of party dress. You notice the theme here? I keep on making these party dresses. And I used to regularly, at least once a year, throw a party. But not so much here in Jamaica. It's been 3 years. And while I have a great circle of friends, a lot of them don't live here. And so I have this beautiful large house I live in now, and nobody lives here with me. But it won't be like that forever. It won't be like that forever. So what happened this week? Oh, my daughter headed back to Portland to start working again in her profession. And I did have a laugh. She was trying to stuff this red dress. She only wants to bring one suitcase to go back to work, and she was trying to stuff this dress in her suitcase and carry all the other clothes that she's taken from me in there. And I was like, girl, that crinoline's not gonna fit. So she made some tough choices, but she sure did leave with that red Spider-Man dress. All right, all trimmed out. I'm going to press with a pressing cloth, and then I'm going to put on the sleeves. Now, I'm doing it differently because the sleeves are a flat attachment, and it's not, it says ease or gathered, but because it's a stretch fabric, I think I'm going to be able to attach them without running gathering stitches. All right, here we go. All right, so now that you have sewed your facings together along the edge, the facing that's attached to the front and the back of the robe has the interfacing on it. And then the additional facing, front facings and neck facings, you're going to attach to the interfaced facings. And that's going to give you your collar of the gown. I'll kind of show it to you this way. All right. Okay, so of course you're going to have to cover up this stitching that you have there, and there's a couple of ways to do it. After you've trimmed your front facing that's interfaced to the front of the robe, and you've trimmed away this edge, there's many ways in which you can now finish off your garment along the front edge. Now, one of them is that you're going to turn your facings for the wrong sides to face each other. Use your pressing cloth and iron all the way around, press all the way around so it's nice and flat. So I'm going to do that and then show you what you can do next. Now, one way that you can finish off this collar and front edge is this is my interfaced front facing, this is my robe front, and this is the other front facing that is not interfaced. I have pressed this, after trimming, I've pressed this seam allowance towards inside. And I've also pressed this seam allowance inside so that it gives the edge of the front and collar facing. So that means that I have to finish off in here, and there's several ways you can do it. In this case, in this material, because of the weight of this knit, I can turn over the edge, secure it with pins, and I'll show you that. Oop, I found a silver star. Trying to avoid those silver stars. All right, and once I do that, I can stitch in the ditch along here to secure it in place in this seam right here. That's one method of finishing off the front facing and collar facing. Now on this robe, I'm going to stitch in the ditch around the edge of the facings, and you'll see what that looks like right now. Now, if you're very lucky, when you stitch in the ditch, you'll have a very thin stitch line on the opposite side and an almost invisible stitch line on the front. Now, the other method is to do exactly the same thing, turn under the edge, pin it in place, turn on a movie, and blind stitch along all the way around the edge, and you will secure it in place. I chose this finish for this velour because I was not comfortable with stitching in the ditch in this case. All right, so that's the other alternative. All you need is a good movie, podcast, or a talk with a friend. And I think it took me I filled up my needle with a 2-foot length about 4 times to go all the way around the edge, including the neck. But I think it was worth it. Now, right here is a good stopping spot for me. It's time to get on about my day. That was a good, say about half an hour worth of work. All right, so the next step is going to be the sleeves. I have about 15 to 20 minutes before I start dinner, so I think it's just about enough time to add the sleeves. I like to fit in sewing where I can get it in. I mean, I can get large blocks of time, but sometimes you just have a few minutes, enough time to baste a zipper, sew a button on, and eventually your project gets done. Now, because I'm working with almost an ITY level of stretch on this knit, I'm going to French seam the sleeve. That doesn't work all the time. It just might work with this because it is a flat sleeve. There's not really a curve, an armhole curve and everything. Even though there is a curve on the actual sleeve piece, you cannot always French seam a sleeve. But in this case, I've already done 2 of them, and with that level of stretch, I think you can do it. But if you don't want to, then you can sew the sides, sew the inside seam of the sleeve, gather it at the cap, and insert it into the sleeve. But I'm gonna French seam it. All right, so because I'm French seaming my shoulder, now this is my recommendation. This does not mean that you should do this. I stitch 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the seam allowance on the sleeve that I had lined up my notches to the front and back of the robe that's been stitched together at the shoulder. All right, so I went along and now I'm going to trim. And then I'm going to flip it inside out and seal these little edges inside the seam. Now my sleeves are done and those pesky raw edges are enclosed. If your serger makes you happy, serge. If you need to zigzag and double stitch, zigzag and double stitch. This just happens to be my thing. I really love those seams being caught inside there. I don't know why, I just do. All right, so now this was another little 20 minute burst of sewing for me. It might be time to get my jams on and I'll sew up the sides together. But I'm really loving this material. I think my daughter is gonna love it. I'm not gonna be able to do her romper because I'm still waiting for her fabric to come from America. But so glad I started this in July because I wouldn't have been able to get more fabric to match her set if I had waited until, say, November to start on this. All right, it's another morning. I have a few minutes before I have to go grocery shopping and running errands. And I am going to stitch the sides of my robe. I know I'm on another gown. I have pinned them in place. I'm doing the French seams. Remember, you can serge, double stitch, whatever you'd like to do to do the seams at the side. But I am going to French seam them. I like the garment to look as good inside as outside. Serging will do it. My poor serger is right here. I don't use them a lot like I should, but now that I have the time to sew, I like to do the French seams. All right, so we're gonna stitch the sides together, trim. I'm gonna flip it inside out, press, and then I'm gonna do the final stitch. And this robe is almost done. Then I'll work on the sash. Now it's time to make the sash. We are going to attach the end of the sash. Make sure it's not the pointy end, which is the tip of the sash. But sometimes when you're dealing with knits, they roll and you get confused. But it's the other end that we're going to stitch. All right, we're going to open up our seam and press it open. So now I am going to pin where they are attached in place because this is going to make your sash folded in half. Now you're going to have to leave a space open when you stitch around length so that you can turn this inside out. I did not find any markings or any slashes or circles or anything telling you how much space to leave, but just probably about 2-3 inches you're going to leave open, and then you're going to stitch all the way around the edge and finish off your sash, and then we're going to turn it inside out. All right, folks, it's time for a little trim and turn. Be careful not to cut your stitches. Maybe I should take my own advice. What should we talk about? Well, I feel really, really good about getting ready for Christmas a little further down the line. I love to enjoy my Christmas. I love the carols. I love the baking. I love all of that sort of thing. But what I do not like is that super rushed feeling that you have when you have to find the perfect gift or you have to go out on the street because you forgot someone. So that is why I fully embrace the Christmas in July mentality. I've been doing it for a number of years now. It makes me really enjoy my holidays. Now, I know some people love the rush of Christmas, and if that's your thing, you do you, boo. That's okay. But I am not one of those people. I like plenty of time. I always make a few extra crafts and things just in case someone stops by with a gift for me or my family. So I like to be prepped and ready to enjoy the holidays. And nothing makes me crazier than finding out I'm missing something. So that is why I do the Christmas in July sort of thing. All right, I'm going to finish trimming the rest of this out. Then we're going to turn it inside out, and we're almost done with the robe. Okay, here is my trusty turner. And if you've not seen it before, you find the spot. Hopefully I left a hole in here. I know I did. Oh, there it is. You slide in the pointy end and gather the tube that you've made. This is a larger tube, so it's easy. I have another method for very narrow tubes that involve my serger, but this is a loose tube, so we got lots of space. Oh, almost there. Oh, at last. And so we get to the very point, and then you close it, and then you pull everything to the other side. It's really cool. All right. So now that is one half, and I'm going to do it to the other side. So then you're going to slip stitch up this little opening that you left to pull your sash through, press your sash, and you're good to go. So as you can see, my Christmas factory is coming along. I have my robe in wine. I have the robe in, oh, that's the romper. I have my robe in marigold. I have my robe in tie-dye stars, and I have my robe in white. All right, so I have robes, but I do not have rompers for everyone. I have the marigold romper, the burgundy romper, but so now I need the white and the star romper. I'm unable to do the tie-dye star romper because I did not buy enough fabric, and it's on its way from Fabric Mart. But I do have enough for the white. So I'm gonna show you how to do the romper. It's so simple. It is 2 pieces, the front and the back. And let me see, some elastic. That's all you need. Gotta go grocery shopping. when I have another 15, 20, 30 hour to sew, we'll start on the romper. Back from my errands and some blustery weather, but you're gonna love this part of the romper. It only consists of 2 different pattern pieces, the front and the back. All right, so first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna attach the front shoulder seam to the back shoulder seam in 2 separate pieces. Now on the romper, this is the hardest part of the whole pattern, which you'll see is not difficult at all. Using the guide given by the pattern piece, you're going to place this elastic touching the seam line. So you can use something like this and set it to 5/8. Right there, 5/8. And you can judge how far down from the edge of the underarm, the neckline edge that you're going to place your elastic. See, this is 5/8 and the elastic fits right there because that's where you're going to stitch it in place. The reason you're adding elastic is to give yourself a little bit more support because you're going to get in and out of the romper through the neck. And so after a while, even though this is a knit fabric, pulling it up and over your hips a bunch of times can create, this could start to sag. And you don't want to put this kind of work into something and have it not last the full length of time. So I'm going to go around the edge and I'm going to pin my elastic in place along the edge just before the seam line. Now you may find as you pin your elastic in place that you're going to have to stretch it a bit in order for it to sit in the right way on your garment. And that's okay because that gives you a little, it pulls in a little on the neckline so that you have a better fit on your romper neckline edge. Now it's off to the sewing machine to stitch this elastic in place. I'm going to use a narrow zigzag stitch so that there's a little stretch when I stitch this elastic. Now we are going to turn the edge over to finish that edge. We're going to turn the seam allowance over. We're going to turn it over the elastic, as you can see here, and then we're going to turn it one more time so that when we top stitch later, we have this flexible neckline edge so you can slip in and out of your romper. So they recommend that you baste it in place with like a running stitch. I'm going to pin mine, but you know, it's your option. You decide. Now this is why I prefer the zigzag stitch, because as you put it on and off, your stitches won't snap or break as you slide in to the neckline of this garment, because there's no zippers. You're going to slide in through the neckline edge. And if you do a zigzag stitch, you've got plenty of room. Now the next step is to stitch the front of your romper to the back of your romper on the inside inseam of your leg pieces. I've had to pin mine because this is a very fine knit and it likes to roll. Unlike the plush velour and the ITY fabric that I use that like to stay flat. So I'm going to stitch this. You can serge, you can double stitch, you can French seam it. It's up to you. Now it is time to attach the crotch area from the center of where they meet, the front and back meet, on that crotch curve all the way up to where the necklines meet. So you're going to stitch that in place on the front and on the back. I'm going to pin mine in place because you see how my fabric rolls. Okay, it's time to sew. Now that we've stitched the inner edge, now it's time to turn your garment. All right, now it's time to stitch each side of your romper. And then we're almost done. All right, now that you've sewn the sides and the front, we are going to narrow hem around the neckline that had the elastic included, and then you can narrow hem the underarms, which is fold over 1/8 and fold over another 1/8. All right, and the romper is done. All she needs now is a final hem. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to verify the inseam measurement that I took on everyone that I hope this works, that I took on everyone before I do the final hem.